Hello.
You're doing it.
Do we need that mics and stands after the stuff?
We do not.
Okay.
Welcome one and all. I'm the Reverend Doug Watkins, and I'd like to welcome you here in our worship service, whether you're joining us here in the sanctuary or watching from home on live stream. We are united as a single community. This is a liberal religious community of spiritual seekers, and we invite you in the fullness of your age, race, ethnicity, gender expression, sexual orientation, and religious background. Throughout our history, we have been about a faith that is lived not in deeds, not in creeds, but in deeds, and not in the hereafter, but in the here and now. Our core values are freedom, reason, respect, and love. If you are visiting us for the first time, we do offer a special welcome. We hope that you will feel warmly a part of this place and that today's message will speak to you, and that we will see you with us again. If you are here in person, please fill out the guest card you received on the way in so we can stay in touch with you. If you didn't get a guest card on the way in, please ask for one before you leave and turn it in. If you're visiting online, let us know you're here by emailing welcome@eliotchapel.org so that we can personally welcome you to this beloved community. A reminder that next week we will be doing a time of remembrance as part of our service as we end October. We will, of course, acknowledge the people within the congregation who have died in the last year, but if there is someone special to you that you would like to have acknowledged, I invite you to send me an email that's listed, but it is minister@eliotchapel.org, and we will include that. Please include their name, their date of birth and death, and any help with pronouncing their name correctly. But we would love to have an inclusive time of remembrance for those who have passed in the last year. As we move into our service and we light our chalice, we honor the living legacy of this congregation. We gather this morning, but let us not be people of forgetting. Let us practice holding collective memories that might otherwise slip into that enormous void that sucks and corrodes at any future we hold dear. Let us practice honoring truth-telling from the past that must come fully into the now, lest we falter and fail, lest the whole remain in pieces. Let not our need for comfort or simplicity, for easy forgiveness or false pardon, smother the essence of who we are together. As we light this chalice, and as we practice what it means to be together, may resilience be with us. May memory and promise come together. May we dance in the tension we find and rest in the integrity we cultivate. Let us be partners with possibility that emerges. With all of this true in this space, it is good that we gather. I invite us to rise in all the ways that we do as we join in our opening song, 1023, Building Bridges.
Building bridges between our divisions.
We are a people of covenant. That is, we promise to each other how we will be together. I invite us then to join together in the reading of our covenant printed in the order of service, as together we say, "As a free congregation, we promise to one another our mutual trust and support. To create beloved community, we promise to be kinder to each other than we have to be. To listen fully to each other with an open mind and heart. To speak responsibly and respectfully. To find ways to improve our church, all members and friends."
Our time for all ages this morning is titled Hard Truths, a reflection by the late Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend David Petit. These are his words and message shared through our voices.
So one of the important things about a Unitarian Universalist is that we do what we can to seek the truth and love. Now, this might sound easy to do, but what happens when you think that you know one story, but while seeking the truth about it, an entirely different story emerges? This is what happened to the Reverend David Petit a few years ago.
In his family, Reverend Petit was the person who knew the most about his ancestors. Over time and generations, a lot of great stories had been passed down and collected, and he was proud that so many of his ancestors had done so many things. He decided that he wanted to keep learning as much as he could about their story.
Well, the internet makes it much easier for us to find out things about our generations than ever before. So he could sit at his computer and find records at his fingertips. And one day in 2006, he found an old record from the 1770s that he could search online. He typed in an ancestor's name, and living in a house in Rhode Island where he found out that there were 4 enslaved Africans also living at the address of his ancestor. This was a horrible surprise. He concluded, "I think the story made my ancestors feel embarrassed, so they stopped talking about it, and gradually it was forgotten."
That there had been slavery in New England was also a surprise to Reverend Petit. He had thought that slavery only existed in the South, but it was practiced in the North for over 200 years. The more he learned about this truth, the more he wanted to know what had really happened. After a year of researching, he learned that not only had several of his family members enslaved Africans, but he also had an ancestor who was the captain of a ship that brought slaves from Africa. This news was hard to accept and made him feel ashamed.
But the decision to seek the truth and love asked more of him, because he came to know so much more about his ancestor, who was the ship's captain. He decided to go to Africa to see with his own eyes the places that his ancestor had visited. And amazingly, some of the buildings were still standing. And walking in the footsteps of his ancestor made history come more alive for him. The most unexpected thing was that he began to feel different inside. While the story was ostensibly about bondage, he began to feel liberated from feeling so ashamed, free to talk truthfully and honestly about a story that has been such an uncomfortable and powerful and awful part of our history.
When Reverend Petit returned home, there was even more work to be done. He wanted to locate a person whose ancestor had been enslaved by his ancestor. He wanted to share all that he had learned and hoped that this information might better help this person understand their own family history. He felt that their two families were already joined by this common history.
And he found out that even though the life stories of African Americans were often not recorded in official public records, that African Americans kept their own records. They did the best they could to leave a trail behind for others to follow. And one day, looking at the records of my ancestors, I found a mention, he wrote, of African Americans with the same last name. And I began researching those people, and gradually the story began to emerge. It was clear that this particular person was one of the enslaved Africans from my ancestors' home. I found out who his descendants were, and I traced that family all the way to the present day.
A year and a half after David Petit began his search for the truth, he called Pat, who lived in New York City. He felt really afraid that she would be mad because of what his ancestor had done to her ancestor. But she wasn't mad. She was grateful. Grateful that he had made the effort to learn as much as he could and that he was willing to share it. Pat knew very little of her own family history, so this information filled in a lot of gaps and missing information.
Petit wrote, "Pat and I have become good friends. We refer to one another as cousins. We have since met other people, those with ancestors who were enslaved, and those with ancestors who enslaved others. And we've had important and truthful conversations. While the legacy of slavery is still a deeply unhappy part of our history, we are learning that by being willing to face the truth together, we can build a new legacy. What started out as something embarrassing and shameful, now for me feels very hopeful. And through it, I've made a number of great friends." So, as we explore in the service today, one of the important places of courage has to do with that willingness to look at history with honesty and openness, and to push especially into the places that make us uncomfortable. That ongoing work is both a place that requires great courage, but also, if we continue in it, it is often a place that gives us great courage as well.
So may it be. Children, you may exit toward the back as we sing you out for RE. We will start very soon.
Our reflective time is taken today from the poetry of Joy Harjo, a poem of hers entitled Remember. As we prepare to take in the poem, I invite you just for a moment to find a comfortable way to sit in your seat, to open yourself and feel grounded with the earth itself, firmly planted on the seat underneath you. And for just a moment, if you're comfortable, close your eyes and let your breath bring you fully present into this place. Remember. Remember the sky that you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon, who knows who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn. That is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown in the giving away tonight. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath. You are evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father. He is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are, red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them. Listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind, her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember you are all people and all people are you. That the universe is you. Remember all is in motion, is growing, is you. Remember language comes from this. Remember the dance language is, that life is. Remember. And may our remembering continue as we remain seated and our breath calls us into number 396. As we move into our time of offering, may we remember our deeper connections. And that this month, as is our tradition, we give away half of our offering to the Red Circle. Since 2017, this local organization has worked for the holistic betterment of our community, reversing the effects of racism, one person and one cause at a time. Their focus areas include employment, education, holistic living, changes in policy, and the arts. And they are concerned with economic inequality, educational achievement, civic engagement, and the exposure to the pleasure and depth of the arts. As we think about our lives and the gifts that we have been given, may it lead us to a deeper sense of connection and generosity. And from that spirit of connection and generosity, may we give abundantly. The offering will now be received and given in such a spirit. As our greeters come forth with our offering, may we join together in dedicating these gifts by reading together the dedication of the offering printed in the order of the service, as together we say, "To the work of the church, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives, and these are offerings." Thanks to all of you and to all of you for your generosity. As we move into the time when I want to explore with you history, as I thought about this time of year and how many traditions help us understand that this is a time when often we feel a deeper connection with the spirits, the people, the memories that came before us, I wanted, instead of a reading, to, for a moment, invite us to invoke some of those images and memories as we think about the implications of what it really means to hold history more deeply. So I invite you to join me for a moment, and then we'll move into the anthem and then reflect on what it means to call our ancestors more present and to let the real truth that they have to offer change how we understand who we are. From our histories, our ancestors call to us. They ask us to understand their lives and our own. We are grateful for their gifts and their lessons and their challenge, calling us into accountability and responsibility to fulfill hopes and aspirations. We call on and invoke our parents, our grandparents, our aunties and uncles, our siblings from across time and place to be here with us. We call upon our ancestors of the first people in this area, the Osage, the Miami, the Sioux, the Haudenosaunee tribes. We call on early Unitarian Universalists, lay and ordained, who brought their faith, their tradition to Missouri in the Midwest. We call on the ancestors of Eliot Unitarian Chapel who built, grew, and dreamed this church and this community into being. We call on the people of Kirkwood who strove to build beloved community, activists, ancestors who struggled for justice, freedom, and liberation of all people, especially those who battled racism and oppression right here in Kirkwood, St. Louis, in Missouri, which is still alive today. They ask us to join the ongoing struggle to make this place whole. We call upon and honor the beauty of the earth, this particular part of creation, its rivers, its lakes, its forests. Now we ask that you call in your own mind and heart your own particular ancestors, family roots, spiritual mentors, your own guides in life. Each one of us brings into this room our own network of people and places that are our guides. For a moment, invoke your own. May our ancestors guide us on our way. May they bless this space and time in the work that we do. I invite you, as we end this time, to join me in saying, "Ancestors, be with us. Ancestors, be with us. So may it be." Thank you, choir. Beautiful. I believe it is so important and good for us to invite our ancestors along for our interim time. There are many things that we focus on in the interim period. There are actually 5 focus points that we will return to again and again. We'll do things like we'll look at our leadership. We'll look at our mission and clarify why we exist as a congregation. We'll look at our connections both within this community and in the larger world. We'll look at the future and use all that we know to help us honestly and specifically discern what the coming years are asking of us. But it begins with heritage, realizing that the way that we hold our histories is essential to shaping the truth of our present, and inevitably, profoundly creates the perspectives that manifest the ways that we consciously and otherwise dream of our future. The reality of the importance of heritage manifests itself individually, congregationally, and in the larger community as well. And the thing about heritage, history, memory is what a complex, magical, and strange thing it is. Rosalind Cartwright reminds us, memory is never a precise duplicate of the original. It is always a continuing act of creation. When I think about my own ancestors, it is hard for me not to imagine first my relationship with my mom, who passed away a couple of years ago in her mid-90s, and only a few months before she passed away was still mowing the yard every week. She was quite a piece of work, to say the least, and I remember in particular some of the times of big change in our lives in the ways that she reacted to those changes. One year, as I finished graduate school, the first time that I finished graduate school, I was off to the West Coast to do my internship with the First Unitarian Church of Portland, Oregon. It was the first time I'd ever been that far away from home, much less on the West Coast. And it was a big deal to me. I packed my few meager things from my graduate studies and spent just a couple of days with my family and my parents at home. And they helped me pack my bags, and I flew off to Oregon. And when I got to the house where I was going to be staying, I noticed that really my luggage felt much heavier than I would have expected because I was trying to travel very lightly. And so I plopped it down on the bed and I opened it up and I looked at what was inside of my luggage. And there were all sorts of objects right on top of my packed things that I definitely did not put there. And very central within that was this. A cast iron skillet. Well, the very last person who had been in my bedroom before I left was my mother. So I called her a few minutes later and I said, "Mom, the funniest thing. As I opened up my luggage, one of the things I found was one of your cast iron skillets." And there was this long pause, and finally my mom said, "Douglas, I just wanted to give you something to remember me by." As we think about the stories that form who we are, we realize the gift and the complexity of remembering them. And sometimes it's also by understanding the gift and complexity of the people that we love most in their histories that we understand more deeply what it means to be alive. Joan Didion wrote this: we are well advised to keep on nodding terms with the people we used to be, whether we find them attractive company or not. Otherwise, they turn up unannounced, surprise us, come hammering on the mind's door at 4 a.m. of a bad night, and demand to know who deserted them. So in our histories, we think about what we understand our lives to be, and much like with David Petit, then sometimes we discover more and more. So when we explore history, we understand it as a series of stories that help us know who we are. And there's a particular reason for the story component to be so important. For instance, when my mom was struggling with the death of my father, for the first time ever, she joined me on a trip out to the West Coast, a trip that I had made myself so many years before. And throughout that time, as she saw a new place, she also told stories about her relationship with my father. And as the stories began to unravel, some of them were full of much love and wonder, and some of them struggled mightily with the disappointments and resentments that they had carried between each other all those years. All of those stories were essential for my mom to know what life was asking of her now. If she hadn't looked at them honestly, she couldn't really delve forward with a sense of possibility and liberation. More likely, she would have been encumbered by fear and entrapped by the past. The same was true in her final months. As she moved into dementia, gradually her world got smaller and smaller, but until the very last day that I spent with her, she would tell stories about her life over and over again. At first, in part, it seemed to be shared with us, but eventually, as much for her to practice in her own mind and being, the stories that shaped her life. All of us practice those stories throughout our lives. And as we think about how our individual stories come together into the larger story of this congregation, or into the larger story of how we are part of the fabric of this planet in this country, those stories remain important. We all are part of a larger system. That system has a sort of organic wholeness. It isn't a mechanism that if you took its parts and separated them, that it would help you understand how the machine of our life works. It is all that we bring, all of the stories, all of the complexity that really makes us deeply human, that really forms the fabric of what it means to be together. And so only stories help us begin to explore that which shapes the meaning that allows us to inhabit our lives fully, authentically, courageously. Today, after the service, I'll invite those who are able to spend a few minutes thinking about your experience of this place, and to tell stories about this place. Because it is through the ways that you tell stories that you shape a sense of meaning. But something deeper than that happens. David Lloyd wrote this: "We do not experience a world and afterward make up stories to understand it. Stories teach us what is real, what is true, what is possible. They are not abstractions from life, though they can be. They are necessary for our engagement with life." As the Scottish philosopher Alistair MacIntyre put it, I can only answer the question, what am I to do, if I can answer the question of what story or stories do I find myself a part. As we move into a time of thinking about who you have been as a congregation, as you always reflect on who you are now as a human being, think about the stories that hold you, that remind you whose you are, what you are about, that pull you more deeply into the connection of life itself. I'm often reminded in thinking about who we are as human beings, the quote from Reinhold Niebuhr. He wrote this: "Nothing that is worth doing can be achieved in our lifetime. Therefore, we are saved by hope. Nothing which is true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history, and therefore, we must be saved by faith. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we must be saved by love." And finally, no virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend and foe as it is from our standpoint. And therefore, we must be saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness. As you think about your own sense of history, as you find the courage to be honest about it, it's important to invoke our ancestors, to let their voices tell us more fully who we are, to let their voices remind us more deeply what flows before we were ever born and will flow long after our life has ended. My mother's voice is part of that powerful ancestry. What ancestors' voices are speaking to you today? May we reflect together after the service about what that means for us and in the days to come. Amen, and blessed be. Will you join me in our closing hymn, number 301, Rising in All the Ways That We Do? Touch the earth, reach the sky. We'll do the first, second, third, and then finally fifth verse.
Show
And now as we prepare to leave this place, Peter Rabel reminds us, we build on foundations we did not lay. We warm ourselves by fires we did not light. We sit in the shade of trees that we did not plant. May we always find ourselves called in the deep sense of connection. We ask our ancestors to stay with us a few more moments and guide us through our time today. Though we extinguish this chalice, we do not extinguish the light of wisdom, the warmth of human connection, or the fire of our commitment to what matters. These remain until we gather in this place again. I invite you to take a seat and receive one more gift of music before we leave this place. I invite you to join us for coffee hour. I will stay here and set up for the 11:15 gathering. So at 11:15, any of you who are able to be part of our Living Legacy time together, I invite you back here. Whatever the rest of your day brings, thank you for sharing this time with us today. May you go forth from this place with a feeling of being blessed by our time together and bring that blessing into the world. Thanks for gathering. See you next week. Take care.